Hi, this is a video extension of the last video I made, which is intersubjective ethics and things like that, and how based on a culture or a tradition, how it doesn't matter based on these small individual groups that we experience things on. It doesn't matter the color of something. It doesn't matter how we perceive the color, our projections of value, our perceptions, or anything like that, our standards or understandings, calling it by a different name, the semantics of an argument or understanding of something that exists in this objective world that we live in doesn't matter because it's something that exists in the reality. Our projections of value don't matter on even if it's our projections of value only matter when they're right, considering it's the only kind of time it has any value beyond the value of the effect of our projections of value on something that has an effect on us, making us feel a certain way. Our projections of value only have any meaning if it has some kind of objective correlation to something that's actually happening in reality. Same like an opinion. It only means something if it exists. And the opinion in and of itself maybe have an effect on someone, but the effect of this opinion, the opinion that you have of something else, only matters, and the matters if it has something to do with the reality that we're living in, some kind of relevant way of describing the reality that we're living in. So back to this group idea, this group analogy. The group, obviously, what you have is the aberrant in one group, the few in one group. Say a group of three, two people believe something, so that becomes a law in this group. But even though the one person and the believes otherwise, and it's based on one subject, and you go over to another group, and the aberrant is the majority in the other group that you're experiencing, and the one person believes what the other two people in the other group believed. So it doesn't matter. This intersubjectivity, ethics, and qualifications of something that's objective in this world can't be applied, and it almost shows on the grand scale when it comes to these individual scales, and inflating it up to a big scale, because it just shows that it's based on some kind of majority rule, based on conditions, cultures, whatever it may be, and past circumstances and things that may have happened to you before. So it doesn't matter this is no proof of any kind of objective standard, because the objective standard exists outside of ourselves, regardless of our perceptions and our projections of value. Our projections of value is something I think we have more recognition that we like something, someone else doesn't like something, but our perceptions can also say someone that has a perception of schizophrenia, they obviously have a perception, and they automatically believe something's existing in reality based on their false perception. They're being fooled by the perception. I think perception's a more powerful thing, that at least in recognition of something that only means something to you, or something that you accept or recognize as part of reality. It's more of a more powerful thing. Then I guess that's a difference between perception and projection. Perception's more powerful because it controls the way you see the world, and sort of like being paranoid or doing this, having certain feelings based on your perception. And projection is the thing that causes feelings based on your interaction with the environment, how it imposes back on you, and how you relate yourself to the environment, how it has an effect on you. So back to the group analogy that I keep changing the subject on. So this group analogy that we exist on is obviously the aberrant in one group, and this and that and the other thing. It goes on an opinion. It proves that on a grand scale, when you combine all these groups together, even if you have a majority on one side and a minority on the other side, we can all recognize based on these small individual groups that you categorized on, or that were categorized on. Combined into one, and it created just differing opinions based on different circumstances, based on these individual things with one group, then turned into two groups, then you combined all groups. Then you recognize that it was just an opinion based on some subjective standards, intersubjectivity, creating some sort of standard for some kind of objective truth that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, I think there's a distinction. I don't necessarily know everything about the concept of intersubjectivity or the definition, but it might have to do with some distinction that the intersubjective beliefs of individuals is obviously, since there's nothing outside of this intersubjectivity based on the individual, something that would be applied to someone that's, say, an atheist, based on our intersubjectivity, or applying it to some kind of religion, becomes the objective truth. And intersubjectivity becomes synonymous with the relationship with objective, at least from that point of view of a person applying it to an objective truth. It's not an objective truth. It's a might makes right kind of truth, sort of like these individual countries have their different might makes right. They have different laws applying to something, and Like the group going into one, you recognize it's just a bunch of different group opinions and leading into one based off of one person having an opinion, this having an opinion, and you combine two groups, and then the dynamic might change. This might become the reality, and then then you go into the big group, and the opposite becomes the inner subjective truth. So what becomes the inner subjective truth? Because it can't be applied based on a population, because the population changes, this happens, that happens. But I guess it's saying it's some kind of based on the group you're living in, but the whole group we're living in is the human race, the sentient experience. And I get applying this to an individual group, then changing it based on the group enlarging, then the dynamic changing based on, then the ethic changing or the standard changing, just proves that you can't necessarily apply this to anything. You can't bring the one sick person along to satisfy the two people that want to go to the theme park to have a good time. You have to make sure that you're obviously the negative outweighs the positives in the world that we're living in, and that's the thing that we base our objective standard on, is do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. The golden rule, the golden standard of recognizing that the thing that makes an objective truth is what exists in reality and what does best for these. If anything, intersubjectivity should be applied to the best feelings of being in a comfortable state of mind based on all these sentient beings, as opposed to just getting what you want based on your own personal biases and standards and things like that. So we're obviously playing a game with standards and recognizing how we can get something just as satisfying out of doing a negative deed as a positive deed, and that's where laws come in and creating an inequality and imposing rules on certain people, and how that can change on a bigger scale from a smaller scale, recognizing that progression is getting smaller to getting bigger. It can change the dynamic, and recognizing that it's just personal opinions being applied to a certain group. It has nothing to do with intersubjectivity. It doesn't have anything to do. It's just a constantly changing standard that has the ability to change based on different groups, the different size of groups, the accumulation of groups. It can change. And recognizing that almost creates intersubjectivity to completely become an invalid concept, because it just changes over and over again. It can be applied, then a different group believes a different thing based on some kind of mutual understanding and agreement, based on something that changes as the group changes, as the group dynamic, as things like that change. But it's about the mechanism of comfort, the satisfaction, the mechanism of experiencing some kind of pain, and just being the experience of these individuals experiencing something that's either in a good state or a bad state, a comfortable state or an uncomfortable state. And it doesn't matter how we perceive it or apply our personal biases to some kind of intersubjective standard that we create for everyone around us based on culture, based on tradition, based on law in these individual cases, and applying it to a big thing, sort of like Christianity. Different countries have different standards. Christianity in religious countries is still the majority standard majority standard, or at least it's something that still applies to the largest group of people in the country. That doesn't mean it's right. And it's more so in other countries and just because the most people believe it, the evidence revealing the truth otherwise is proof enough, regardless of the substantiation of some kind of large group of people still believing in a subject. If you apply some kind of non-religious standard to a religious standard, the non-religious in some countries now outweighs the religious standard, and just because it's still a large group or the largest individual group in some country or in some standard or in something, the might makes right, regardless of the facts or the recognition of some kind of reality existing around you. And some kind of religious standard has no proof other than the proof in and of itself based on a book like a Bible. It only proves itself. It only has the proof in and of itself. It doesn't have the proof in some recognition of the reality other than basing some kind of religious text or some kind of subjective standard based on some kind of religious text or some kind of moral standard like that, based on some kind of thing in the reality, making references to a reality other than proving the reality, the book, from the reality. It takes things from reality and just implements it into the book and creates only some kind of proof that can be proved in and of itself. The Bible, the only proof that the Bible has is the Bible itself, the words said in the Bible, and that's all it has. So might makes right, even against some kind of objective standard that we can recognize reality in. And back to the idea of recognizing this intersubjective word and understanding how the might makes right, and how a mutual agreement based on some kind of ethnical or societal standard that we can apply to the rest of the world, or based on a standard. It can only be applied in individual groups based on the individual dynamics and the subject of the dynamic that you're creating. of the discrepancy that you're creating based on a group of people that can change, and based on how big the group gets and how it changes and how different people get in a group, and then what we believe and so on and so forth. The belief doesn't matter. Once we're gone, something's going to exist. Reality is still going to exist even though we're not gone. We're just not going to be having projections. We're not going to be being a projector projecting some kind of value. We're not going to be here experiencing the projection of value that we project from ourselves and recognize and experience from our own point of view, based on some kind of even physically speaking, the reflection of light based on something. You lose your senses. You slowly and piece by piece lose your hearing. You lose your sense, and your living becomes less and less and less and less. You become less sensational, and in recognizing at least these other sensations, you become paralyzed. You don't feel as much, and the objective standard still exists even if you don't feel something. Say, just because you don't feel the prick doesn't mean it's not causing some kind of damage to the nerve endings in your body or doing something. It's not. It's still the needle went into your body, and so on and so forth. Even if you can't feel it, it's still something that happens. And you can still find something and so on and so forth. That's the point I want to make. It still happens. It's still happening in the reality that we're living in, no matter how much we can consider it not happening in the reality that we're living in. So yes, regardless of culture and all sorts of things like this, something is still happening. The intersubjective standard that we create is just an opinion, a projection of value, a perception based on our own biases, experiences, and circumstances, and the objective reality that we exist in exists outside of ourselves and in ourselves, and the comfort and the state that the sentient being that we are, and everything else around us and the other people that we have in positions on, and so on and so forth, has an effect on, and it matters how we feel just as much, and it matters just as much how we feel, being in a good state or being in a bad state, than what exists, other than more than the color of red being the color red, or something existing, the light reflecting and creating that color. The feeling means more, and the fact that it exists, and it means more because it's a sentient experience, so it means more than even, or it can be objectively proven to mean more. At least the suffering standard of uncomfortable, this dichotomy between this side and that side, comfortable and not comfortable, being somewhere on that scale of being as uncomfortable as you've been, or the overall scale. It exists just as much as anything else in this reality that we're living in, and it means more because it has effect on an individual being, experiencing sensations and so on and so forth. So I think I made my point good enough, so I appreciate it. Until next time, bye.